Hi, everybody. Welcome to 5 days of digital instruction. We are going to first log on to your Google Classroom, Miss Goulart's 5th grade English. And if you are on your stream, it is titled Tuck Everlasting Mini Unit. But if you go ahead and click on your classwork page, you see that they're divided into topics, and all of your information will be located under the Tuck Everlasting Mini Unit. Go ahead and click, and then click on the slideshow. Your instructions are to click the slide presentation attached. This slide will be used for 5 days of online instruction, turn in when complete. And each day I'm uploading a video that has to do with the day's information, what we're working on together, okay? Once you're there, I'm going to do a quick introduction of what we're working with, and then we'll start on our first day's lesson. So the first slide is titled Tuck Everlasting Mini Unit, 5 Days of Digital Learning. Tuck Everlasting is a novel. We are reading chapter 1 of Tuck Everlasting and using chapter 1 for all 5 days. Slide 2, if you want to go ahead and click there, by the end of the week, we're going to be able to compare and or contrast 2 or more characters, settings, or events in the story or drama, drawing specific details in the text, finding text evidence to prove our answer. But along the way, we're going to have to do a few more things to understand how to do that as well. So as we read, we'll also be quoting accurately from the text. When explaining what the text says explicitly, highlight the word explicitly. I'm going to highlight it yellow, just basic. That means exactly what it says. You read the text, you can answer questions based on what you've read in the passage. And when drawing inferences from the text, meaning we're using what we know explicitly, what's there, and making educated guesses on questions that might be asked. All right, then we're going to be able to determine the theme of the story from the text, including how characters in a story or drama respond to challenges, or how the speaker in a poem reflects on the topic, but mainly we're going to use this to summarize the text because we've got to know what it means and what it says before we can do anything with it. And lastly, we're going to also understand and determine the meanings of words and phrases that are used, including figurative language. There are a lot of figurative language examples in this paragraph or in this chapter, so we'll use that as well. Okay, so today we're going to be reviewing what the plot of a story is, and then we're going to read the first chapter, identifying the elements of the plot, because that helps us summarize the story. First off, we think of the plot as a hill. A lot of teachers explain it in various different examples. We're going to think of it as a roller coaster. We start at the very bottom of the roller coaster, and that's called the exposition. This is in every fiction story, okay? This does not apply to nonfiction, it's strictly fiction. But in every fiction story, the exposition or introduction introduces the characters, setting, where it takes place and when, and the conflicts, as well as the events that are occurring in the beginning. As you read, we're going into the rising action, which are basically just the events that lead up to the climax. It's the turning point of a character's life. A lot of times we're taught that it's the most exciting part of the story. Not always, but it definitely marks a change in the characters or character in their life. After we have the climax, we have the falling action, which are just the events that lead to the resolution, the tying up of the story. This differs if we're reading novels that are in a series, because, for example, the Harry Potter series, we don't ever have a whole solid resolution until book 7. And even then, it leaves some things open-ended. But just be careful if you're reading a sequence or a novel unit with a lot of different books in it, a series, it won't always have a direct resolution at the end of each book, okay? All right, now as we read, we're going to be keeping in mind these plot elements since it is chapter 1. Think about it. Where on this plot diagram or plot roller coaster are we going to stay mainly? In the exposition in the very beginning, since it's chapter 1 of a novel. It's going to be probably introducing us the character setting and conflict that's being given, okay? All right, move to slide 5. We are introducing Tuck Everlasting by Natalie Babbitt. This is fiction, but it's fantasy. Keep that in mind because that is definitely going to help us whenever we're drawing inferences from the passage because it will help us determine what could happen next, okay? It's fantasy, maybe, or have some realistic elements in it, but definitely has an element of fantasy where it couldn't really happen in real life, okay? All right, go ahead and move to slide 6. All of the slides in this chapter are divided by paragraph. There are 8 total paragraphs. So each of the slides will have the paragraph on it. I'm going to do a few paragraphs with you as well as the previous or next slides. And then I'm going to ask you to do it so that we can check it together, okay? All right, chapter 1, paragraph 1. Read along with me as I read in the text. The road that led to Tree Gap had been trod to walk out long before by a herd of cows who were, to say the least, relaxed. It wandered along in curves and easy angles, swayed off and up in a pleasant tangent to the top of a small hill, ambled, walked slowly, down again between fringes of bee-hung clover, and then cut sidewise, across a meadow. Here its edges blurred. It widened and seemed to pause, suggesting tranquil, calm or peaceful, bovine picnics. This word bovine means cow. It's just a fancy word for cow. Slow chewing in thoughtful contemplation, deep in thought, of the infinite. And then it went on again, and came at last to the wood. But on reaching the shadows of the first trees, it veered sharply, swung out in a wide arc as if for the first time it had reason to think where it was going, and passed around. All right, stop. Let's just draw some attention to a few elements of this paragraph. Notice we see some vocab words, and next to the vocabulary we're focusing on, we have parentheses and a definition inside, okay? So therefore, if we look at the word trod that I've highlighted up top, trod or trodden means to walk. So it's talking about the road that led to Tree Gap had been trodden or trod, walked on, out long before by a herd of cows. So cows walked on that road a long time ago, all right? That's basically what trod or trodden means. So that's how the vocabulary will be introduced to you as we read. All right, let's stop really quickly and think about this for a minute. Click on slide 7. What is paragraph 1 mainly about? Let's think about it. Were there any new characters introduced? No, we don't have any characters other than the bovine or the cows. We don't really need to write that. Any settings that are introduced? Definitely. Remember, a setting in a story is when or where the story takes place. So we've got, and I want you to type with me as we type right now, the road to Tree Gap. Make sure you capitalize Tree Gap. That leads me to believe that Tree Gap is a what? A town or a city. There's a road leading to it, and the name Tree Gap is capitalized. Usually names of towns and places are capitalized. So on the road to Tree Gap, I'm going to flip back and forth from the previous slide. If you would like to use your arrow buttons, the up and down arrows will help out tremendously with that. So it says, the road that led to Tree Gap was walked or trodden out long before by a herd of cows, wandering in curves and easy angles, swayed up in pleasant tangent on the top of a small hill. So it's weaving through very, very slowly and calmly through a pasture. So we'll call it cow pastures, comma. And then it says, when it went on again and came at last to the wood. The word wood here is used singularly. It's a singular noun. But they're using, or the author is using the word wood to discuss a large forest or an area of woods. That's an interesting noun. It can be used singularly like this, but mean something plural as well. Now it says, as soon as it got to the wood, reaching the shadow of the first tree, it veered sharply, which means turned sharply, swung out in a wide arc, which means like a semicircle, around. So did the road go through the woods? No, it veered sharply and swung around the woods. And in the text it says it had reason to think that it was going to pass around. That's strange. So the road, I'm going to click back to here. Cow pastures, but I'm going to put wood dash the road goes around the wood, comma, not through it. I'm going to spell check, of course. That's weird. Why would it go around it? So I'm kind of questioning this. I'm going to put a question mark next to through it, what I just wrote down. Because that would make sense, wouldn't it? If you're already weaving or leading up to a forest, why then would you not continue the road through the forest? There could be a number of reasons, but that's odd to me. Have we been introduced to a main conflict of the story? No, we don't even know characters yet, so we can't have a conflict at this point. Events, nothing really that hasn't been discussed already in the setting. So if I were to ask you, what is paragraph 1 mainly about? What would you say? It is mainly about the setting of the story. Click underneath events and press return or enter depending on what type of computer you're using. I want you to put main idea dash. We usually use main idea for nonfiction passages. But it is interesting to note that, there is a point. Sometimes they'll ask you questions about paragraphs, specifically what did the paragraph mean? And in this circumstance, we know we're going to be comparing or contrasting a character or a setting in the future by day 5, pretty much. And so that's something we need to think about, considering the only thing I see is information about the setting. So the main idea of this paragraph 1, is just description of the setting of the story. All we really need to know, okay? Click to paragraph 2 slide. We're going to read the second paragraph. All right, this is still an I do, so I am continuing to read this to you guys. And then we together will answer the questions on the next slide as well, okay? Paragraph 2. On the other side of the wood, the sense of easiness dissolved. The road no longer belonged to the cows. It became instead, and rather abruptly, the property of people. And all at once the sun was uncomfortably hot, the dust oppressive, weighing heavily, and the meager, few or less grass along its edges somewhat ragged and forlorn, pitiful. On the left stood the first house, a square and solid cottage with a touch-me-not appearance. That's underlined, interesting. Surrounded by grass cut painfully to the quick, which means very short, and enclosed by a capable iron fence some 4 feet high, which clearly said, "Move on, we don't want you here." So the road went humbly by and made its way, past cottages more and more frequent, but less and less forbidding, into the village. But the village doesn't matter, except the jailhouse and the gallows. Ooh. The first house only is important. The first house, the road, and the wood. Interesting. Okay, that's very important. Anytime any passage, book, novel, etc. tells you what is important, we need to make sure we understand that. So to identify this section, I have one of them underlined. I want you to highlight it. Let's highlight it. Blue, this light blue color. Anytime it tells you this is the most important thing of the story, pay attention to it, because it either is the most important thing or your narrator is what we call an unreliable narrator, and it's not. And they say that to draw your attention to it, so it draws your attention away from what's actually important, okay? I'll give you a little spoiler. It is important. This is a circumstance where the narrator is telling the truth. So that's interesting. It talks about, let's click to the next slide, slide 9, where it asks us, what is this mainly about? Do we have any new characters introduced to us? Kind of. Let's add it just in case. The villagers and the people that live in that first house. We're going to talk about them in the next chapter. So the setting changes. It does. Now, I'm going to flip back and forth, like I said before, to the previous chapter, or paragraph, I'm sorry. It said the road no longer belonged to the cows. It became instead and rather abruptly the property of people. And all at once, the sun was uncomfortably hot, the dust oppressive. So it says or talks about, I'm clicking back, that the meadow and the road was easy, had a sense of easiness to it. It did. The way that it was described made you feel calm and tranquil. That one of those words that was described as calm or peaceful. And then all of a sudden, as we move into the village where these people live, it becomes abruptly or very quickly totally different in tone or in feeling. It becomes too hot, too heavy, too foreboding or uncomfortable. Everything about it is different than the pasture and the meadow. So the setting changes to the first house, comma, and the village of Tree Gap. I'm going to put a dash. Very uncomfortable feeling, unlike the previous, which means the one before, the previous setting of the, did we call it a meadow? No, of the pasture / wood. And here's what I'm going to do for what we highlighted. Click back to paragraph 2. This highlighted statement that we highlighted blue, I'm going to Command C, copy it. And then I'm going to Command V, as in van, paste it after what I wrote next to setting, because all of these are technically settings, are they not? The first house is only important, the first house, the road, and the wood. So we've already been introduced to the 3 things that are the most important, allegedly, that the narrator tells us we're going to be reading about, okay? That's important too, because we might want to use this as text evidence to prove one of our answers later on. Is there a conflict yet? No. We haven't been introduced to any main characters, just the villagers. Any events that are occurring that we haven't already discussed in the setting? No. So under events, press return or enter. The main idea is the exact same, in a way, than the previous paragraph. This is just explaining the different feeling of the second setting. That's important because we do know that we are going to have to compare contrast settings most likely, maybe characters. So this could help us out whenever we're comparing the two in the very end of the school week. All right, go to paragraph 3. Still isn't I do, I'm doing this with you. Paragraph 4 is when we're going to start sharing some responsibility, and we do, okay? Paragraph 3. There was something strange about the wood. If the look of the first house suggested you better pass by it, so did the look of the wood, but for quite a different reason. I love this paragraph. The house was so proud of itself that you wanted to make a lot of noise as you passed it, and maybe even throw a rock or two. I wouldn't suggest doing that. But the wood had a sleeping, otherworld appearance that made you want to speak in whispers. This, at least, is what the cows must have thought. Let it keep its peace. We won't disturb it. I love that it's giving a lot of quotations to the cows who don't speak and to the house, how it seemed proud of itself. It's very interesting. That's figurative language. All right, so let's think about it. It says the very, very first sentence, there's something strange about the wood. Both the houses, or house, the first house, and the wood had a touch me not appearance. You better pass on by, but for totally different reasons. And I love that. That's huge. This is super important to what we're going to be doing at the end of the week in comparing settings or contrasting them. Go to the next slide. What is it about? Characters? Nope. Setting. Not new, but described better. Conflict? Nope. Events? Nope. So setting. Here we go. It says both the woods and the house have let me click back and see. Have a you better pass by me kind of look. Have a standoffish feeling, but I put but in all caps for different reasons. Dash. The woods were, I'm going to put this in quotations, otherworld. I apologize. That's my timer. Otherworldly, worldly. Otherworldly. What am I? Yep. Which means they felt like they weren't on this earth. They felt very peaceful, almost supernatural, as if they weren't real. But the house, dash, was proud. Made you feel like you wanted to yell at it and throw rocks at it as you walked by it. That's funny. Now, can houses really feel proud? No, they can't, but they can make you feel like that. Tell me what you think. Let's think about this for a second. How would we describe a house that felt proud? What do you think it would have on that house or in that house that would make it sound or feel proud? It was probably big, right? Probably very, very big and stately. What else? It could be fenced in, right? It could have a fence around it that made you want to yell around it, because fences are typically made to keep people out, and a lot of times makes people maybe want to be in more because it's not supposed to be available to everybody. Yeah, those are all good ideas. That's usually what I hear from students when we have this discussion. Now, the woods were more tranquil or peaceful, which is one of our vocab words, or otherworldly, which means it was probably what? Really quiet. It said it made you feel like you wanted to whisper as you walked by it. So they were probably very quiet and peaceful, which most woods typically are, okay? Now, events, no, we've already said that, but the main idea, yet again, describing differences of wood and house. Very good job. You'll click on slide 12. We're moving into the we do. So here's how we're going to break the we do down. I am going to read the paragraph for you, and then I'm going to ask you to pause the video, and we're going to, or you're going to answer the questions that we have below on your own. Then you'll unpause the video and we'll check ours together, okay? All right, paragraph 4. Whether the people felt that way about the wood or not is difficult to say. There were some perhaps who did. But for the most part, the people followed the road around the wood because that's the way it led. There was no road through the wood, and anyway, for the people, there was another reason to leave the wood to itself. It belonged to the Fosters, the owners of the Touch-Me-Not cottage, and was therefore private property in spite of the fact that it lay outside the fence and was perfectly accessible. Interesting. Click to slide 13. This is the we do section. So I read it with you. I want you to practice the character setting, conflict events, or main idea. So if there are any new things that we just read about in paragraph 4, I want you to add them to the list, typing them out as we did together. Press pause once you're ready, and whenever you're ready to check it with me, press play and we'll check them together. All right, go ahead and begin. All right, assuming you've done this, let's go ahead and check together. So characters, we are introduced to the Fosters. I'm going to take that out. The Fosters, who were the owners of the Touch-Me-Not cottage, which is the first house. I put that in parentheses in case you were confused. They also owned the wood. New setting? No, we've already been introduced to this new setting. Conflict? Nope. Events? Nope. Main idea. Introduction to the Fosters. That just means we were introduced to the Fosters, which could be the main characters of the story. And it also gave us another reason why people didn't go into the wood. Let's just check and review really quickly. If I were to ask you, what are the 2 reasons in chapter 1 that people did not go into the wood, what would you answer? Good. 1, paragraph 3 talks about that it was strange. That's the first reason. The woods were strange. And the woods were owned by the Fosters. Also, you could even argue that because the road didn't run through it, people didn't go through as well. Great job. One more we do. I will read paragraph 5. You will do the notes for annotation on paragraph 5 below, and then we'll check together. Paragraph 5, let's read. The ownership of land is an odd thing when you come to think of it. How deep, after all, can it go? If a person owns a piece of land, does he own it all the way down, or even in the narrowing dimensions till it meets all other pieces at the center of the earth? Or does ownership consist only of a thin crust under which the friendly worms have never heard of trespassing? This is a challenging one. Click on slide 15. I'm going to let you do it, but think about what we've done together. If we don't have a character, do I type anything under character? No. Same for setting conflict or events. If we have nothing for all of them, what should we do? Move on to the main idea, okay? Pause your screen or your video. Answer the questions. We'll come back and check when you press play. All right, notice exactly what I was telling you in your instructions before you pressed pause. No characters, no new settings, no new conflict, no new events. This is a strange paragraph, but it does prove to be important as we read through the rest of the novel. The main idea. This is just basically questioning the ownership of land. How far can someone own land? It's asking, do they just own the surface of the land? Or do they own all the way down into the core where all of the pieces fit together? It's a strange paragraph. It seems like it doesn't really fit, but it will make sense as we read through, okay? All right, let's move on to paragraph 6. We've got 6, 7, and 8 left. Here is the I do section. In a minute, I want you to press pause. I want you to read paragraph 6 and answer the questions. Are there new characters, setting, conflict, events, or main idea on the next slide for 17, okay? Once you've read the paragraph and answered or written down your information, I want you to press play and we'll check together. All right, what is paragraph 6 mainly about? We are introduced to Winnie Foster. She is the child that lives in the Touch Me Not cottage. We see Touch Me Not repeated about 3 to 4 times now, so it must be important. She's never been into the woods. I put a question mark and an exclamation point because that's strange. She lives right next to it. It literally scoots up to her fence, but she's never been into it. And they do offer a little bit, the narrator offers a little bit of information. They say it's not that interesting if you own it. And that's kind of true. Think about if you have siblings, like a younger sibling. I have a 2-year-old. And forever, when he was a baby, he has this like jumper thing that has these cool toys around it, and he hated it as a baby. Now that we have our youngest son, who's at the time of filming 6 months old, we take it back out, or we took it back out the other day, and he's playing with it. Now, my 2-year-old wants to play with it constantly when he didn't want it at all whenever he was younger, but someone else is interested in it now, so he is now also interested in it. It's the same concept. If you own something, it's not that cool until somebody else shows some interest in it. Let's think about it though. We don't have any settings that are new, no new conflicts, and no new events. Do I need to add a main idea statement for this? No, I don't, because right here is pretty much what the whole paragraph is about, right? Introducing Winnie to us and telling us that she has never even been into the woods that she owns. So if I have all of my information in one or all of these blanks right here, I don't need to add a main idea unless it's necessary, okay? All right. Scroll to slide 18, paragraph 7. Same thing you do now. We're going to read paragraph 7, answer the following questions, and then unpause your video whenever you're done. All right? All right, let's go ahead and check ours together. Paragraph 7 is mainly about basically why Winnie might not want to go into the woods. I added one detail that you didn't know yet that I want you to write down as well. Let's look at what we have for characters. So we don't have any new characters introduced, but we do have some clarification about Winnie. So I add that, and anytime we have a main character, even if they're not new to the story, but they have some sort of awakening, or the narrator or author tells you more about that character, you'll add that to your character section, okay? So Winnie doesn't want to go into the woods because it's gross. I put gross there. And the setting has a lot to do with that, because do all girls think those kinds of things are gross? No, not at all. Animals like squirrels and stuff aren't gross. That's strange to think that. A lot of girls like playing in those types of things in areas where they can build things, climb trees, stuff like that. But the setting is important for this section. Now, you probably have this part. You probably have the description of what's in the woods as the setting. That is important to note. But I want every one of us to type late 1800s, parentheses, Victorian era, in parentheses. You didn't know this before, but I did. And this is important to why Winnie may not want to venture out of her fenced-in yard into the woods. Because in the late 1800s, specifically in the Victorian time period, little girls were made, especially wealthier ones, which I'm thinking Winnie is considering her family owns a lot of the town, right? And the woods around it. They were made to look kind of like little dolls. They had very, very pretty clothing. Usually they would wear dresses and very cute shoes and stockings with lace all over it and have their hair done every day. So it would venture to say, or we would venture to say, that she might even get in trouble if she were to get any of those things dirty that she's wearing. And she's not usually allowed to play in those types of settings. And so that's most likely why she doesn't want to go into the woods as well. Not that she really thinks that stuff is gross, but because the way she was brought up in the late 1800s makes little girls usually like that. Do I really need anything for a main idea? No, because I've already included everything in these two areas right here. All right, last paragraph, and this one's the big one. Notice I have some underlined information inside of it. Anytime I underline anything for you guys, it's typically important, okay? This one's going to take a while, so whenever I say go, please pause. Read paragraph 8 very well, and if you have to pause for a long time to do this, that's completely fine because there's a lot of information in this. And then answer your questions here, okay? So go ahead and pause and begin. Okay, this one's a little much. I have stuff underlined for a specific reason, as you could tell. So, any new characters introduced? No. Setting. We are more specific with our setting. So, we're introduced to if they would have had the road go through the woods, it would have led to a giant ash tree with a spring bubbling at its roots, kind of like a fountain at the bottom, just producing water at the roots of this tree. And then they go on to discuss that if anyone found this spring, which I'm moving to conflict now, and then we'll come back up to the large word that I have written there. If anyone found that spring, it would cause such disasters that the earth would tremble on its axis. And I put that in quotes because that's directly from the paragraph. That's a lot. I put that in conflict because this seems like a problem. It seems like a big problem. And considering this is chapter 1, it leads me to think that maybe something is, we know this book's fantasy, right? So maybe something is magic. That's why I have this word with a question mark next to it about the spring. Maybe there's something bad about it. It says disaster, and usually the word disaster isn't good, right? It has a negative tone. So that's a lot to think about whenever I read that one paragraph. So we're introduced to 2 settings basically through this whole chapter. Setting of the woods and the meadow leading up to it with the road. Then we go to the totally opposite different setting of the village in Winnie Foster's house. It has a totally different feeling to it, right? And talking about how Winnie owns the woods around it, even though she's never been into it. And then this last paragraph is really, really important to understand the conflict of the whole story. So basically, if anyone finds this spring, it could be magical. It would cause disaster. All right. Now, we've summarized it. We don't need to do a main idea for this one because we've answered everything that was in the paragraph with these 2 topics. I want you to come here, which says, what questions or predictions do I have about what I read? It says type your answers here. Anytime you have an open response like this, you'll double click and you won't just leave the type your answers here. You'll delete it and actually type your own answer, okay? So I want you to do this. I want you to think based on the fact that it's also fantasy, meaning magic can happen. Things that don't happen on our planet can happen even though it seems like we're on Earth right now. I want you to think about what questions you might have about what's going to happen next or what predictions you may have. Now, these predictions, based on what we talked about we were going to do with our standards at the very beginning of the slideshow, can't be insane. They can't be like, I think the cows are going to sprout wings and they're going to fly. No, that's not the fantasy type we're discussing here. I want you to specifically think about what kind of disasters could occur from this spring, this water fountain basically at the bottom of the tree. Knowing that we're still on our earth, but there could be some magic involved, okay? I want you to think like that. You can have a question or a prediction. You can have 5 questions and no predictions. You can have any amount, but you can't have none. That's my only thing, okay? So pause your video and go ahead and write however many questions or predictions that you want to, and we'll come back and discuss. All right, these are the most common questions up top and predictions on the bottom that I usually get, but we can go in a lot of other directions as well. Will Winnie go into the wood? What do you think? It's chapter 1. I don't think they would have introduced her to us for nothing. I also don't think they would have introduced the fact that she's never been into the wood for nothing. Probably. Will she discover the spring? I think so. Why are the 3 settings the most important along with the jail? I think that's important too because it mentions a jail. We always kind of skim over that part. The gallows are those ancient contraptions that make you put your head and your hands through holes and you have to kind of sit there all day. We usually think of the Salem witch trials when we think of gallows, but something's got to happen that's not legal in the eyes of the law of the world that we live in, and someone's going to be punished for something in the jail or maybe even in the gallows, maybe Winnie, maybe her family, we don't know. And then lastly, for our predictions, some people think the spring's magic. That's a fair prediction for sure. Some people think the spring is poison and will kill whoever drinks it. That one goes along with the word disaster because it says it's going to be disastrous if people find it. That could be true. Maybe Winnie's family's evil and they'll actually find the spring and purposely hurt people with it. I get that a lot. Some of my previous students have even said maybe there's something underneath the tree or down to the core of the earth coming from that weird paragraph 5 that kind of didn't seem to fit, really talking about how can you own land and how far does the ownership go. Maybe there's something at the core of the earth that comes from the spring. We don't know. But those are all pretty fair predictions and questions based on what we read. Remember, predictions or inferences always go with what we have already read. They're not totally crazy out of your mind like a unicorn's going to flow from the spring. That makes no sense with what we've read, okay? Awesome job. We've done our first day of reading. Tune in tomorrow to our video for day 2 using the exact same slideshow. We're going to add and build as we go through the week with this chapter. All right. It was great seeing you guys and great reading with you, and I will see you tomorrow.